Virginia, summer of 1866. The war was over. At least that was what people said. Men in uniforms had ridden through counties and courthouse squares announcing freedom. Papers had changed hands, laws had changed names, but on small patches of land far from public roads, in places where old habits wore new clothes, some kinds of bondage simply learned how to speak more softly. Elias Carter was 28 years old when he found the chains. He found them by accident, on a hot afternoon thick with gnats and sweat, while helping his father clear out the back shed behind their cabin. The shed leaned slightly to one side, sun-bleached, half swallowed by weeds, the kind of place where broken tools went to die and old memories waited to rot in private. His father, Jonah Carter, had grown weaker that summer. Not sick in the obvious way, no cough, no fever, no wound anyone could point to, just a thinning of him. A slowing. As if some invisible hand had started turning him down, one small notch at a time. So Elias had taken over more of the work. Roof patching, fence mending, hauling sacks of cornmeal, lifting what the old man no longer could. That afternoon, they were dragging a worm-eaten crate toward the shed door when one of the bottom boards gave way. The wood split with a dry crack, and something heavy slid out onto the dirt. Iron dropping hard into dust. Elias froze. At first he thought it was harness gear, old farm iron, something for mules. Then he saw the cuffs. Not one set, several. Iron restraints, black with age, thick enough to bite through skin, linked to lengths of chain too heavy for ordinary field use. There were wrist shackles, ankle shackles, a collar ring with a hinge on one side and an old lock plate on the other. One piece had a stamping on it, half faded but still visible beneath rust and grime, 47. Elias bent down slowly, touching the metal with 2 fingers. It was colder than it should have been. Even in that heat. He turned one shackle over in his hands, studying the weight of it, the shape, the worn grooves where it had rubbed flesh for a long, long time. These were not souvenirs. Not scrap. Not anything a man kept by accident. He looked up at his father. Jonah had gone completely still, not surprised, not confused, still. His face had emptied in a way Elias had never seen before, as if every expression had stepped back at once and left only dread standing in the doorway. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Elias asked the only thing he could ask. "What are these?" Jonah did not answer. The old man lowered himself onto an overturned bucket near the wall, not with the care of age, but with the collapse of someone who had just seen the past stand up in front of him. Elias waited. The flies buzzed, somewhere in the trees behind the house. A cicada started screaming into the heat. Still no answer. Elias tried again. Whose chains were these? Jonah's eyes remained fixed on the dirt between his boots. When he finally spoke, his voice came low and thin. Mine. Elias felt something inside him go tight. He laughed once. Not because anything was funny, but because the word made no sense where it landed. What do you mean, yours? Jonah lifted one hand and rubbed his thumb slowly across 2 knuckles. An old habit Elias had seen his whole life, but never thought much about until then. I kept them. The old man said. To remember. To remember what? Jonah's jaw shifted. A time before. That answer was wrong the moment it left his mouth. Elias knew it. Maybe Jonah knew it too. Because it sounded prepared, like something spoken before. Something practiced into shape long ago, and used too often to still feel true. Elias stood with one of the shackles hanging from his hand. The chain pulled at his wrist with brutal, silent weight. To remember what? He asked again, firmer this time. Jonah finally looked at him. His eyes were not angry. They were tired. Tired in a way Elias suddenly realized he had never truly understood. A man should remember what God carried him through, Jonah said. Elias stared. That was the story then. A keepsake. A reminder. Something a man saved to prove he had survived. It should have been enough. It was not enough. Because there was something wrong with the iron. Wrong with the number. Wrong with the way his father could not look directly at it for more than a second at a time. And wrong, most of all, with the silence that settled after. The old man rose again, too quickly, nearly stumbling in the process. Put them back, he said. Elias didn't move. Jonah's voice sharpened. Put them back in the crate. That was wrong too. His father almost never raised his voice. Not to him. Not anymore. Elias lowered the chain slowly, but did not let go of it. These aren't ordinary restraints. Jonah turned away. You don't know what's ordinary. I know enough. Do you? The old man's back stayed to him. Thin shoulders beneath a faded work shirt, shoulder blades pushing against cloth like wings that had never learned how to open. You know what they told you, Jonah said quietly. That ain't the same thing. That should have been the beginning of truth. Instead, it became the end of the conversation. Jonah made Elias stack the chains back into the crate. One by one, iron against iron. Each piece falling with a sound too final to be called simple noise. Then he nailed the broken board roughly back into place with shaking hands. Not well. Not securely. Just enough to cover them again. Just enough to pretend they had not been found. By sundown, the shed was cleared. The tools were sorted. The crate was shoved against the far wall. And nothing more was said. At supper, Jonah barely ate. He tore cornbread into small pieces and left most of them untouched on the tin plate. He did not meet Elias's eyes. He did not offer another explanation. He did not mention the chains, not once. Outside, the evening cooled by degrees. A little breeze came through the open window over the table, stirring the curtain, carrying the smell of damp earth and cut wood. Elias watched his father in the half-light and felt, for the first time in his life, that there was someone else in the room with them. Not a body. A secret. A living thing. It sat between them, breathing quietly, waiting to see who would speak first. No one did. That night, Elias pretended to sleep. Their cabin had only 2 rooms, and little privacy. He lay on his cot, staring at the dark boards overhead, while the house settled around him, listening to his father's breathing from the next room. Slow at first. Then absent. Elias heard the bed rope creak. He heard bare feet touch the floor. He heard the door open. He rose without lighting a lamp and moved to the window. Outside, under a pale strip of moon, Jonah Carter was walking the edge of the property. Not wandering, walking a pattern. Deliberate, measured. He stopped at the fence line, stood still for a moment. Then turned and crossed to the far side of the yard, stopped again, turned again. Like a sentry. Like a man checking boundaries. Like someone afraid something might cross in, or out. Elias watched for nearly an hour. His father never once looked toward the house. Never once sat down. Never once moved without purpose. When at last Jonah came back inside, Elias closed his eyes and slowed his breathing. He heard the old man kneel beside the hearth, then the scrape of loose brick, then the small metallic clink of something being counted. Coins. Elias knew the sound from childhood, though he had only ever heard it in fragments. 1, 2, 3. A pause. Then again. 1, 2, 3. As if the number had to remain the same. As if certainty itself could be measured in gold.
Then, after the coins were hidden again, came the thing Elias would remember for the rest of his life. His father began to whisper. Not praying, not exactly. Speaking, softly. To someone. Too low to make out every word, but enough to hear the shape of it. No, not him. A pause, I did what I was told. Another pause, longer this time. Then, with a strain in the voice Elias had never heard before, I said I would keep him clear of it. Elias opened his eyes into darkness. Every hair on his arms stood up. There was no one else in the house. No visitor. No neighbor. No sound but his father's breath and those torn-up fragments of confession falling into the dark. The next morning,
behaved as if none of it had happened. He rose before dawn, fed the chickens, cut kindling, spoke of weather and fence posts and whether the lower field might flood again if the rains came too early. The ordinary shape of the day returned, but it no longer fit. Not after the crate, not after the chains, not after hearing a man speak in the dark like someone still standing trial for a crime no one had yet named aloud. Elias said little. He worked beside his father through the morning, carrying lumber, patching a corner of the chicken coop, listening for hesitation in every answer, for weakness in every lie. And just before noon, he saw it. Jonah crossing the yard with a coil of rope over one shoulder. The sleeve of his shirt had pulled back slightly, and there, high on the inside of his wrist, almost hidden in old scar tissue and years of weathered skin, was a mark, not a lash scar, not an accident, a number, faded, but still there, 47. Elias stopped cold. His father noticed a second too late and tugged the sleeve back down. Neither man spoke, but something had already broken open. The chains in the crate were real, the number was real, and whatever story Jonah Carter had spent 20 years building around his freedom, it had begun to crack. By evening, Elias no longer believed the man who raised him had simply kept old iron as a reminder. No, those chains had not been stored like memory. They had been hidden like evidence. And for the first time, Elias understood something far worse than pain can live inside a house for years and still remain unseen, if the people living around it are taught never to ask the right questions. That night, he made up his mind. If his father would not tell him the truth, he would go find it himself.
3 days later, Elias Carter rode into Richmond. Not fast, not urgent, but with the quiet weight of a man who had already stepped onto a path he couldn't walk back from. The road south of the city was still scarred from war, fences broken, fields half abandoned, houses standing with empty windows like they were still waiting for men who never returned. Richmond itself looked alive again, but not whole. Smoke no longer rose from cannons, but something else lingered in the air. A kind of tension, like the world had changed faster than the people inside it could understand. Elias tied his horse outside a general store near the James River and stepped into the street. Men argued over prices, soldiers in worn coats leaned against walls, freedmen moved carefully through crowds that still didn't know what to make of them. Freedom had come, but it had not come clean. Elias kept his head down. He had told his father he was delivering carpentry work. That part was true, but it wasn't the reason he came. Not anymore. Because for the past 3 nights, that number had followed him. 47. On iron. On skin. Burned into memory. And behind it, something larger. Something that didn't fit inside the simple story he'd been raised on. He needed answers. And Richmond, for all its damage, still held records. Still held names. Still held pieces of truth buried under ink and paper instead of dirt and silence. The Henrico County Courthouse stood heavier than everything around it. Thick walls, tall windows, the kind of place built not just to hold law, but to outlast memory. Inside, the air was cooler. Dust moved slowly in the light that filtered through high glass panes. A clerk sat behind a wooden desk, flipping through ledgers with the tired patience of a man who had seen too many names pass through his hands to care about any one of them. Elias approached. "I'm looking for land records," he said. The clerk didn't look up. "Name." Elias hesitated, just for a moment. Then, Pierce. Not Carter. Pierce. The name from the chains. The name he hadn't said out loud since hearing it in his father's sleep-murmured fragments. The clerk's hand paused slightly over the page. Just slightly. Then continued. "What year?" "40s, maybe earlier." The clerk sighed, stood, and motioned toward the back. "Archives are through there. Don't move anything you ain't read." Elias nodded and stepped past him. The archive room smelled like old paper and damp stone. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with records that no one had touched in years, maybe decades. He moved slowly at first, running fingers along spines, reading dates, counties, property transfers, names. So many names. Them felt like the one he was looking for. Not yet. Time passed, minutes, maybe hours, until finally, he saw it. A ledger bound in cracked leather, its edges worn down like it had been opened too many times long ago, and not at all since. He pulled it free, set it on the table, opened it. The writing inside was precise, clean, official. Lists of transactions, transfers of land, sales. And then, a section that wasn't land. Not exactly. The heading read, Inventory, Special Holdings. Elias frowned, turned the page. And then, he saw it. A list. Numbered. Not tools. Not livestock. Not equipment. People. Not named like people. Catalogued. Subject 12. Male. Age approximately 28. Subject 19. Female. Acquired from estate. The words were calm. Too calm. Like whatever this was, had been written by someone who never once questioned what they were doing. Elias felt his pulse begin to rise. He flipped pages faster now. The numbers climbed. 22. 31. 38. And then, 47. His hand stopped. He stared. The line read, Subject 47, male, age approximately 35, acquired from estate of J. Harper. Elias leaned closer. The ink had faded slightly, but the rest was still clear. Noted resistance to authority, selected for long-term conditioning protocols. Conditioning. The word didn't belong in anything he had ever heard tied to slavery. It felt colder. More deliberate. Like this wasn't just ownership, this was study. He kept reading. Demonstrates high cognitive retention, responds to isolation cycles, suitable for extended observation. Elias swallowed. Isolation cycles, observation. This wasn't labor. This was something else. Something, controlled, measured, designed. He turned the page. And there, beneath years of dust and silence, was the final entry. 1854, Subject 47 released under Conditional Autonomy Agreement. Released. Elias blinked. His father had said he earned his freedom. Bought it. Worked for it. But this. Subject remains under behavioral monitoring, monthly reporting required, payments issued for compliance documentation. Elias felt the room shift slightly. Not physically, but in the way truth moves when it suddenly no longer fits the world you thought you understood. Payments. Coins. His father counting them in the dark, reporting. Whispering conversations to invisible listeners. Walking the perimeter like a man still guarding something, or being watched. This wasn't freedom. This was continuation, a longer chain, without iron. Elias leaned back slowly. The chair creaked under him. Every memory he had of his father began rearranging itself, not changing, but revealing something that had always been there, just hidden behind explanations that no longer held. The quiet. The distance. The rules that never made sense. The way Jonah avoided people, avoided questions, might still reach out and take hold of him again. Elias looked back down at the ledger, at the number, 47, not a mark of survival, a designation, a label, assigned, tracked, studied. His father had not escaped something, he had been released from it, and whatever had released him, had never really let him go. Elias closed the book slowly, but before he pushed it away, his eyes caught something else. A name, written at the top of the page. Not large, not emphasized, but there. C. Whitmore. Cornelius Whitmore. The name his father had told him to forget. The name that had drained the color from his face. The name that sat now, at the center of everything. Elias exhaled slowly. That was it. That was the door. And he had just opened it. When he stepped back into the street, the city sounded louder, too loud, every voice sharper, every movement heavier. Because now, he wasn't just looking for a story about his father. He was looking at something built, organized, and still close enough to touch. Something that had turned a man into a number, and then let him live the rest of his life pretending that number no longer mattered. Elias mounted his horse without speaking to anyone, and as he rode out of Richmond, one thought settled in and refused to leave. If his father was still being watched, then whoever had written that ledger might still be watching him too.
Elias didn't ride home immediately. He couldn't. Because once you see something like that, you don't just go back to the life you had before. You circle it. You test it. You look for the edges of the truth. And hope, somehow, it stops before it gets worse. It didn't. 3 days after leaving Richmond, Elias returned to the courthouse. But this time, he didn't go to the front. He moved along the side of the building, past the main entrance, past the windows, until he reached the lower level, where the foundation met damp earth. There was a service door there, half hidden, unlocked, not because it was safe, but because no one thought anything important was kept below. That assumption, Elias was beginning to understand, was exactly how secrets survived. The basement air was colder, thicker. It smelled of stone, and water, and something older, like paper that had been sealed away too long. Elias stepped inside slowly. Every sound echoed. Every movement felt louder than it should. Shelves stood in uneven rows, filled with boxes, bundles, records no one had bothered to organize. Or maybe, records someone didn't want organized. He lit a small lantern. The light barely pushed back the dark. But it was enough. Enough to see labels. Enough to see dates. Enough to see patterns. He moved carefully, checking names, cross-referencing numbers he remembered from the ledger upstairs. 12, 19, 31. And then, he saw it again. 47. But this time, it wasn't just a line in a ledger. It was a file, bound in cloth, tied shut, and unlike everything else around it, it had been touched recently. Elias could see it in the way the dust was disturbed, in the way the knot had been retied, tighter than necessary. He froze. Someone had been here. Not years ago. Recently. Watching. Maintaining. Continuing. He looked over his shoulder. Nothing. Just silence. But the feeling stayed. The same feeling his father had carried for years. The sense that privacy was never real. That even when you were alone, you weren't. Elias turned back, slowly, and untied the cloth. Inside, papers, dozens of them, neater than the ledger upstairs. More detailed, more personal. The first page, Subject 47, Behavioral Continuity Report. Elias's throat tightened. This wasn't history. This was ongoing. He began to read. Month, April, 1865. Subject maintains routine perimeter checks. Displays heightened caution in presence of unknown individuals. Continues coin counting ritual. Suggests reinforcement of control anchor remains effective. Elias's hand trembled slightly. Control anchor. That's what they called it.
Not habit, not trauma, a mechanism, designed, maintained. He flipped the page. It exhibits resistance to full disclosure when interacting with offspring. Recommendation: maintain observational distance. Allow natural generational development. Elias stopped breathing. Offspring. That meant him. He turned the next page faster now. Child subject displays early independence traits. Potential deviation from expected compliance patterns. Continue passive monitoring. No intervention at this stage. Elias stepped back from the table. Like the paper itself had pushed him. This wasn't just about his father anymore. It never had been. He had been part of it. Since birth. Every decision. Every lesson. Every silence. Not just a father raising a son. A subject. Raising the next variable. Elias ran a hand over his face. Tried to steady himself. But the pages pulled him back in. Because once you start seeing the pattern, you can't stop. More reports. More names. 31. Charlotte Thompson. The woman at the cemetery. He found her file. Opened it. Subject 31. Compliance retention stable. Grief conditioning effective. Maintain site visitation protocol without deviation. The grave. The visits. It wasn't mourning. It was part of the system. A routine. Observed. Measured. Elias closed the file slowly. The room felt smaller now. Tighter. Like the walls had moved in while he wasn't looking. Then, he noticed something else. At the back of the room, behind a row of shelves. A section of wall that didn't match the rest. Brick. But uneven. The mortar. Cracked in places where it shouldn't be. Like it had been opened. And sealed again. Recently. Elias stepped closer. Every instinct told him to stop. To leave. To take what he knew and never come back. But another voice. Quieter. Stronger. Said, if this is still happening, then this is where it's being hidden. He pressed against the brick. It shifted. Just slightly. Enough. He worked at it. Careful. Slow. Until one piece came loose. Then another. And then. A gap. Dark. Deeper than the wall should allow. Elias reached inside. His fingers brushed something. Leather. Cold. Wrapped. He pulled it out. A satchel. Old. But preserved. Deliberately. Hidden. Not archived. Not recorded. Removed. Because whatever was inside was never meant to be found. Elias stared at it for a long moment. Then opened it. Inside. Pages. Handwritten. Different from the reports. Messier. Urgent. Real. At the top of the first page. The true account of my father's chains. Elias felt something shift inside his chest. Because that wasn't written by the system. That was written by someone fighting it. He turned the page. And read the name. Samuel Washington Pierce. Not a subject. Not a number. A man. Someone who had seen this before. Someone who had tried to expose it. Elias's grip tightened on the paper. Because suddenly, this wasn't just discovery. It was inheritance. And whatever had happened to Samuel Pierce, whatever had silenced him, was the same thing now watching Elias stand in that basement, holding proof that should not exist. Elias froze. Not imagination. Not wind. Footsteps. Above him. Slow. Measured. Stopping. Right over where he stood. The lantern flickered. The room went quieter than silence. And in that moment, Elias understood something his father had never said out loud. You don't find the truth. The truth notices when you get too close. Elias closed the satchel. Didn't put it back. Didn't hesitate. Because now, there was no going back to not knowing. Only one question left. If Samuel Pierce disappeared after writing this, Then how long did Elias have before someone realized he had found it too? Elias didn't leave right away. That was the mistake. Not because he didn't want to run, but because something inside him refused to walk away again. Not after this. Not after seeing his father reduced to ink and observation. Not after realizing his own life had been measured, recorded, before he even knew how to question it. He stood still in the basement, listening, counting the seconds between sounds. One step, pause, another step. Whoever was upstairs was not moving like a clerk, not distracted, not careless. They were listening too. Elias moved, quiet, precise. He wrapped the satchel back in cloth, tucked it under his coat, then blew out the lantern. Darkness swallowed the room instantly. He waited, let his eyes adjust, let the silence stretch. Then, he moved toward the service door. Every step placed carefully, avoiding loose boards, avoiding anything that might echo. The door opened just enough, cold air slipped in. Elias stepped out, and didn't look back. Because instinct told him, if he turned, he might see something he couldn't unsee. He reached his horse, mounted quickly, and rode. Not toward home. Not yet. He needed distance first. Needed space to think, to breathe, to understand what he had just taken. Because that satchel was not just evidence. It was a threat. To someone. To something. And now, it belonged to him. By nightfall, Elias stopped in a patch of trees far from the main road. He didn't light a fire, didn't risk it, just sat with the satchel in his hands, listening to the quiet, the kind of quiet that feels temporary, like it's waiting to break. Slowly, he opened it again. Not like before, not searching. This time, he read, carefully, page by page. Samuel Pierce's words weren't polished. They weren't written for history. They were written for survival. Lines crossed out, sentences rushed, ink pressed harder in places like the hand behind it had been shaking. And the deeper Elias read, the worse it became. Samuel had found everything. Not just Whitmore. Not just his father. A network. Names across states, facilities hidden behind legitimate businesses, funding that didn't stop when slavery ended, just changed its name. Control without chains, one line read, is more efficient than control with them. Elias clenched his jaw. Because that was what this was. Not slavery as he had understood it. Something quieter. Something that didn't need force, because it rewrote the mind itself. Another page. They study not just obedience, but how to pass it down. Elias felt his stomach turn. Generations. Not subjects. Systems. Built to continue, built to survive. Built to disappear when exposed. And reappear somewhere else. Then, he found it. The last section. Different ink. More urgent. Samuel's writing tightened. Sharper. Faster. I will present this evidence. I have names, locations. If anything happens to me. The sentence stopped, mid-line. No ending. No explanation. Just silence. Elias lowered the page slowly. Because now he knew. Samuel hadn't failed. He had been stopped. And everything after that had been erased. Or hidden. Until now. Elias looked up. The trees shifted slightly. The night felt different. Not calm. Not safe. Watched. The same way his father used to look at empty space, like someone was standing just outside sight. Elias reached into his coat, pulled out the satchel, held it tighter. Because now, this wasn't just history. This was unfinished. And if Samuel Pierce had disappeared trying to expose it, then Elias was standing in the exact same place. Just further down the line. He thought about going to authorities. But Samuel had tried that. And disappeared. He thought about telling people, but who could he trust, when the system itself was inside institutions, inside records, inside the very place meant to protect truth.
That's when it hit him. The only reason Samuel had gotten this far was because he wasn't a subject. He was outside the system. And Elias was still outside it. For now. That was the advantage. The only one. But it wouldn't last. Because if they were watching his father, if they had files on him, then they would notice the moment something changed. The moment patterns broke. The moment Elias stopped behaving the way they expected. Elias froze. Listened. Nothing. But the feeling remained. He wasn't alone. Not anymore. Maybe he never had been. Elias folded the papers carefully. Put them back into the satchel. And made a decision. Not to run. Not yet. Running meant disappearing, and disappearing meant the truth died with him. No, if this was going to end, it had to be exposed, fully. Not hidden again. Not buried for another 100 years. But to do that, he needed to know more. More names. More connections. More proof than just one man's account. And there was only one place that could give him that. The Institute. The one Samuel had written about. The one still operating, under a different name. In Richmond. Elias exhaled slowly. Almost a laugh. Because somehow, without planning it, without choosing it, he had stepped into the exact same path Samuel Pierce had walked. The same road. The same danger. The same ending waiting, if he made one wrong move. Elias mounted his horse again. Turned it toward the road. Toward Richmond. Because now. This wasn't just about his father, and it wasn't just about the past.
It was about something still alive, still watching, still learning. And if no one stopped it, it would keep going, quietly, perfectly, like it always had. Elias Carter rode into the dark, carrying the truth in his coat, and the weight of every man who had tried to expose it before him. And somewhere, far too close, someone was already noticing that Subject 47's son was no longer behaving the way he was supposed to. Elias reached Richmond before dawn. Not like before. Not as a man searching, but as someone who already knew there was no safe way out of what he had found. The city was quieter at that hour. Streets still, windows dark, like the world was holding its breath. He didn't go near the courthouse this time. Didn't go near the archives. He went somewhere else. The place Samuel had written about. The Institute. It didn't look like what Elias expected. No guards. No chains. No visible threat. Just a building with clean windows. A sign that read, Institute for Social Research. Respectable. Ordinary. Invisible. That was the point. Elias stood across the street for a long moment. Watching. People entered. Left. Nothing unusual. But that was how systems like this survived. Not by hiding completely, but by blending in so well, no one ever thought to look deeper. Elias crossed the street, walked up the steps, and opened the door. Inside, warm light, shelves of books, men in clean coats speaking in low voices. One of them looked up, smiled. "Can I help you?" Elias hesitated. Just a fraction. Because in that moment, he understood something clearly. They didn't need to hunt him. Not yet. Because as far as they were concerned, he had walked in willingly. "I'm looking for records," Elias said. The man studied him. Just long enough. Then nodded. "Of course you are." Not confusion. Not curiosity. Recognition. The kind that doesn't come from introduction, but from expectation. "You're Pierce's boy, aren't you?" the man said quietly. Elias felt the air leave his chest. Not surprise. Not shock. Confirmation. They knew. They had always known. The man stepped closer. Lowered his voice. "You shouldn't have come back here." Not a threat. A statement. Elias's hand tightened slightly inside his coat, around the satchel. "They've been watching you since the moment you left the courthouse," the man continued. "Same way they watched him. Him. Samuel. Elias swallowed. Then why am I still here? The man gave a small, almost tired smile. Because we needed to see what you'd do. There it was. Not control through force. Control through observation. Through prediction. Through allowing the subject to reveal themselves. Elias stepped back slightly. The room felt smaller now. Like every wall had moved closer. Samuel thought he could expose it, the man said. And he got further than anyone expected. A pause. Then, he was very useful. Useful. Even in resistance. Even in rebellion. Still part of the study. Elias understood then. The worst part of all of it. Not the chains. Not the experiments. Not even the disappearances. It was this. That even the act of fighting back had been anticipated, measured, learned from data. Elias exhaled slowly, and for the first time since this began, he stopped reacting, stopped chasing, stopped trying to understand it from the outside, because suddenly, he saw it clearly. You don't beat something like this by playing inside it. You break it by refusing to be what it expects. Elias relaxed his hand, let the satchel slip slightly from his grip. Not enough to drop, just enough. The man's eyes flicked down, just for a second. That was all Elias needed. He moved, fast, not toward the door, toward the table. The satchel hit the surface, papers spilling, ink, names, records, everything. Out, exposed, visible. Not hidden, not controlled. Voices rose immediately. Chairs moved. But it was too late. Because once truth is seen, it can't be unseen. And Elias wasn't here to escape anymore. He was here to force it into the open. You studied him, Elias said, voice steady now. You studied all of them. A step closer. But you never learned the one thing that matters. The man's calm finally cracked. What is that? Elias met his eyes. That people change. And systems don't. Elias turned. Not running. Walking. Straight out the door. Because now, it wasn't about survival. It was about exposure. People had seen, heard, witnessed. And systems like this don't collapse all at once. They crack. Then spread. Then break. No one knows exactly what happened after that day. Records went missing. Mains disappeared. The institute changed, moved, rebranded, like it always had. But something was different. Because this time, the truth didn't stay buried. Fragments surfaced. Stories spread. And somewhere, in places no one could fully track, people began asking questions they had never asked before. Elias Carter was never officially recorded as missing, but he was never seen again either. Some say he ran, some say he was taken, and some say he understood something Samuel never had time to finish. That the truth alone is not enough to destroy a system, but it is enough to make it afraid. And fear is where control begins to fail. Because chains aren't always made of iron. Sometimes they're made of silence. And the moment someone breaks that silence, even just once, they never fit quite the same again.